Okay, Mr. Kimball, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Kimball. I am the founder and CEO of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition. Welcome to our Zoomcast entitled, How Can Minorities Flourish in a Post-COVID World? As many of you know, some of you have participated with us in the past, we're an organization dedicated to using innovative thought to improve the financial inclusion and economic empowerment of underserved communities. In fact, we've just published a new white paper entitled The Marshall Plan for the Economic Recovery of Black America. It's on our website. We encourage everyone to take a look at it. We're pushing very hard to have some innovative thought and ways to improve these really poor conditions we find ourselves in some 50 years after the civil rights movement. Today, we're very lucky. I mean, three of my favorite people on a panel. I can't do much better than that for a Wednesday evening. First up is going to be Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia. He's Georgia's 4th district in his 7th term, correct? 7th term, sir?
That's correct.
Oh, sorry. He's a true leader, someone we've known for a long time, someone willing to take on tough issues. We love working with him, love hearing his thoughts. In Congress, he is a leader. He's on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, as well as the Judiciary Committee, where he serves as chair of the subcommittee on courts, intellectual property, and the internet. Our second panelist is another great leader, Dr. Charles Steele, President and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's a tireless fighter for civil rights, an innovative thinker, always on the cutting edge. Someone we have come to Washington on many occasions as we can to speak and talk and empower and encourage people to fight. And then our third person is William Michael Cunningham, CEO of Creative Investment Research. Bill's a pioneer in financial innovation and civil rights. And he was one of the first to point out that African Americans were going to suffer in the subprime mortgage crisis back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So he's always on the cutting edge, someone we rely on for information and research. It's done better than be able to pick up the phone and call Bill and say, Bill, what's the economic impact of X? And then he can come up with some crazy graphs for us. So we love Bill. And I'm just very happy you guys all decided to spend your evening with us, and I think it's going to be a good conversation. So I'm going to start with Congressman Johnson.
Well, thank you, Kevin Kimball, my good friend. We've done a lot of work together as I have been in Congress, and you have a storied history in Congress, but you've been on the outside in the private sector as a small businessman and as a astute follower of the political happenings in Washington, D.C. in the United States Congress. And you actually have done some lobbying on behalf of clients. And so as a small businessman, you bring a lot to the table with your legislative experience and your real world experience in terms of dealing in the business of being a businessman. And then the realm of business that you have gone into has been heavily weighted towards the financial sector, which is a sector that is kind of novel to many of our people, but coming at a time of the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis that has ensued from it, and the meltdown of our economy, it means that from an economic standpoint, things will have to be put back together. There will be something new when we come out on the other side of this pandemic and the economic shutdown. There'll be a new set of conditions within which we will all have to operate. And so you, Kevin, are particularly poised to lead this discussion that we're having on how can minorities flourish in a post-COVID world, the strategies and how we will advocate for our people and our situation and what kind of outreach we need to do in order to be effective. And so I'm happy to be on this call with you and also with my good friend, Reverend Charles Steele of the SCLC, and also a gentleman who I've not met, but I'm well familiar with his work, economist William Michael Cunningham. I'm honored to be on this panel with you all. And, you know, my message is that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in the chaos that we see. It depends on how we look at things and whether or not we prepare ourselves and are prepared for what's coming once this COVID crisis has been tamed. And so we in Congress are doing what we need to do in order to keep this economy moving in the right direction. It is definitely challenged with 34 million people being newly unemployed, 27 million of those within the last 5 weeks. And so we are at an effective 20% unemployment rate and going higher before we hit the bottom. And these are challenging times. Congress, driven by the values of House Democrats in the House of Representatives, we have been successful in forging so far 4 bills to address this coronavirus pandemic. And I'm heading back to Washington, D.C. right now as we speak. I'm in the car, I'm driving. Well, I've pulled over so that I could address you all. But I'm literally on my way to Washington, D.C. so that I can vote on what is called the HEROES Act, which is on the T for us to vote on Friday, along with a rules package. And that rules package will change the rules of the House of Representatives so that members of Congress, members of the House will be able to conduct House business remotely. Currently, our rules require that before we can take any official action, we have to be together in Washington, D.C. And that is no longer tenable for us. And we can no longer remain on the sidelines. We've pretty much been sidelined for the last 2 months, being out of Washington, D.C. And a lot of the work that we need to do, we've been unable to do because of our rules. So we're going to be changing the rules on Friday to allow us to conduct hearings from a format such as the one that we're on now, with members being able to participate from either their home or office in the location where they live. And we're also going to be putting into place a process where proxy voting can take place, where we will be able to give our votes to a person who will then cast those votes for us off the floor or on the floor while we are off the floor. So that will enable us to remain remotely located and still vote. And later, and also the rules will provide that at such time as we're able to technically put a process into place that allows us to actually vote from our remote locations on legislation on the House floor, until such time as we get that that capability, that technical capability installed, we will go with the proxy vote. We do get the technology in place. These rules will provide that we will be able to vote from our remote locations as well. So in that way, we'll be able to get back down to the business of government. And so forward to put into place. And so we'll also be voting on this HEROES Act, which is a 5th piece of legislation that will address the coronavirus pandemic. And that legislation is designed to take care of our first line people who out there, they are our critical workers who are working in the healthcare arena. They're working in the public safety arena. They are the bus drivers. They are the public works employees.
I think.
It looks like we lost the Congressman, Kevin,
Yeah.
so why don't we soldier on here? We did have a question from Leslie Anderson, who's one of our board of advisors. She says, what time is the HEROES Act? What is the timeline for the HEROES Act in the Senate? Do you have any idea, or should we get a hold of the Congressman? I can get back to her on that.
Yeah, I think,
Well,
oh, he's there. I think he's still on. Hello?
yeah, I just heard,
Okay.
and yeah, so the House will pass the HEROES Act on Friday. It will then go to the Senate. Mitch McConnell and some of the senators have said that they are opposed. One of the big things that they are opposed to is taking care of those essential workers.
I think he dropped again.
And local governments.
Oh, there he is.
And those governments will then be able to fund their operations, which include those employees. So we don't want those state and local workers to be laid off because of revenue shortfalls by the states and local governments. And we're also going to put more money into the pockets of everyday people. Each family will be eligible to receive up to $6,000 in relief, depending on their income. And we're also extending unemployment benefits all the way through January 31st of 2021. And there are other things that are in that act as well. And I look forward to there being additional acts that help people overcome this this crisis that we're in. So this fifth bill, the HEROES bill, the HEROES Act, is just one in a continuing series of bills that we will have to do in order to make sure that we maintain our economy such that it doesn't crash. And for those of you who are worried about where is the money coming from, we're actually borrowing this money from ourselves. And we will have an economy that is humming along that we'll be able to pay it back. So with that, I will go ahead and yield back to the moderator. I've taken enough of your time, and but I do appreciate being on the panel, and I wish you all the best of a forum tonight. And I'm going to sign out so I can get back on the road and get back to DC before dark.
Thanks a lot, Congressman. We appreciate it. Drive safely.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Dr. Steele?
Thank you so much, Kevin. First of all, I enjoyed listening to the Congressman in terms of his articulation about Congress and what we can hopefully perceive that will become a reality. In dealing with my situation as President CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we're very involved. And to my fellow panelists, all due respect to you, and I know all of you, and I just thank you for being here with us along with Kevin. I've been getting a lot of interviews throughout the country, radio and TV, but one thing that sticks out in my mind is I'm a civil rights worker, a former elected official, state senator, city councilman out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But civil rights to the bone, that's who I am, 45 years. I want to quote Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will, unquote. We have to bring power, ladies and gentlemen, to the table in terms of collaboration, power to power. Congress has power, but the people have all the power. And of course, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, because we believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You can't forget that. And I think the problem that we're having today in terms of the politics is that politics never free to oppress. Never. Just listen to the quote that I just gave you from Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And you got to raise hell. You got to get out there, stir this stuff up, and be willing to sacrifice your life, sacrifice your job, and you can't be afraid. So if I said anything other than that, then I'm doing a disservice into what I'm doing. I'm also a prognosticator. That's why I travel the world. You know, I'm a prognosticator. I travel the world. I've been saying for many years myself that we are in trouble because arrogancy is destroying America. You can be selfish if you want to, but you're not going to succeed. This is a dirty, low-down, selfish, and I'm glad the Congressman is not on. Selfish country. They do not care about poor folks. This country does not, it was not intended for us. Racism is destroying America and ultimately the world. And people don't want to talk about that. You know, Brunswick, hey, that's no accident. That's not haphazardly happened. That's embedded in this country. The man was staked down and trampled down like an animal. And the judicial system, the entire judicial system, that clan of law enforcement officers in Brunswick, Glenn County, I'm asking right now, in terms of the Department of Justice, I'm asking right now that everyone in that culture, in terms of the judicial system, from the DA and other law enforcement officers, be charged with criminal involvement with this video that they all saw and was talking about it, using it as a trophy, and nobody pursued justice and to bring about an arrest upon these people who committed, the father and the son, who committed this travesty. We are saying that it's time out for being silenced. Dr. King said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. And don't come out here saying that you're with me and you're afraid, because you will get killed if you stand up for justice and equality. Dr. King was killed, many others was killed. And you have to be willing to sacrifice, because this country is not going to roll over and have access to capital for poor folks and people of color. That's what the problem is. It's neo-slavery, the transatlantic African slave trade. Nobody want to talk about that. That's why I'm president and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I will talk about it. The transatlantic African slave, this is neo-slavery. Anytime you have the banking system, and during the crisis of 2008, 2007, 2008, and you bail out Wall Street, the crooks, and the banking industry that ripped us off and gave them bonuses, and then bail out the people. You don't bail out banks, you bail out people. And the same thing, and I'm finished, Chiefin, the same thing is happening. I just want to stir up a little something here and not be status quo.
I'm gonna say this while I got you before you finish your statement. Sure. That Bill Cunningham is gonna speak after you, so you're just a warm up. It's only gonna get worse from here. So.
You know, I've heard Bill speak before.
I know.
Okay, thank you for giving me that comfort zone. But the truth must be told, and before Bill comes on, racism is just like COVID-19. It's a virus. It's a virus, and it's very contagious. We have gone back 50 years in terms of the civil rights movement. We have lost the 1965 Voter Rights Act. Section 4 and Section 5 was gutted. That was the catalyst of freedom. And nobody, in terms of the community of leadership, galvanized and collaborated to put pressure on the government, okay, if it's black, white, green, or blue, restore it with executive order. And it wasn't done. I rest my case at this particular time.
I'll be back to you with some questions.
Sure.
All right, Bill, you're up. Your turn. Is Bill there?
Hope I didn't run him away.
No, he might have passed out. Brady, you're.
I'm trying to unmute him, but it won't. I don't know if he has a. He might be getting himself psyched up.
Yeah.
Because I know this is going to be a good presentation. So.
Well, I'll say this. from Dr. Steele and Bill have collaborated before. We all collaborated on a letter to the Fed. Remember, we wrote that letter to the Fed asking us for $50 billion for black banks. And one of the things we're thinking that we've all talked about is that we need to bring back affirmative action. I mean, we do need, we can't let the lawsuits that were lost stand in the way of progress. I mean, we're going to have to push back when they created the 14th Amendment, and then when they wrote the Civil Rights Act, all of those things envision entrenched racism being a problem that had to be overcome. So Dr. Steele, while we wait for Bill to come up, I'll ask you this. At SCLC, you guys have been at the forefront. Do you have a plan? Are you galvanizing? Bill says he's reconnecting. So do you guys have a strategy, or you come up with some strategies, ideas?
Absolutely. Mine is reparation. Okay. Reparation, right across the board. Okay. I heard somebody talking about a diverse reparation. Diverse nothing. I'm talking about descendants of former slaves. Everyone has been paid but us. And we're talking about reparation, not dropping a truckload of money in your yard or put a big box on your front porch of money. Now, create opportunities and have access to capital. Let me get something straight. I'm very, very committed to capitalism. I think it's great if it's fair, equitably and fair. We do not have that within this system. Let me tell you what's wrong, Doc. Prosperity is not shared in this system. Prosperity is not shared. We have to teach this in our institution. You have institutionalized racism. Read the book, The Color of Law, where from the federal government, the state government, the color of law, from the state, federal government, state government, local government, you're talking about a conspiracy against people of color, particularly Negroes, black folks, color folks. Back then we were color and Negroes. So my point being, it was always given the concept that people of color will never bring about an opportunity of wealth within this system. They'll be subservient to white folks. And that is the history, the historicity of this nation. And we have to eradicate it. Now, let me tell you something that's very encouraging. The whole world is waiting on African Americans to take up the baton again and free the world. I traveled the world very extensively. Over in Israel, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon sent for me prior to his death. And his chief of staff looked at me and said, "We know you all are the chosen ones. We know you the ones. You have proven this. You have freed the world." I go to Moscow, Russia with Mikhail Gorbachev. I go to Berlin, the only American invited for the 25th commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was told there, Mikhail Gorbachev at one head, I'm at another head. See, African Americans need to know this. When he told 25 countries in the middle to be in partnership with SCLC, and he also said that there will never be freedom in the world without the civil rights movement and SCLC. And I asked him the question, Mr. Gorbachev, what gave you the courage to knock down that Berlin Wall, which my wife says as a retired history teacher, which saved the planet called Earth? I said, what gave you the courage to knock that wall down? He said, Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I heard him at Sophia Lutheran Church, September the 13th. He said 1964. And I heard him say, no man-built wall can separate God from his children. Only love, harmony, and working together can bring about peace. He said, that stuck with me. I said, Mr. Gorbachev, you was in the audience when Dr. King was speaking? He said, no, I was eavesdropping because I worked for the KBG. And my job was to hear everything that Dr. King said. So by traveling and getting entrenched with this type of leadership, heads of states who tell you that it will never be freedom until African Americans go back to the streets and demand, just as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never happened and it never will.
I think, Bill, are you on?
Hold on, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, switch to the phone here.
Okay.
but please, why don't we have, I'm trying to reconnect on the laptop. So
Okay.
if Dr. Steele wants to continue here,
Well,
give
I'll
me a
tell you
second.
what, while we do we have any questions yet? Are there any questions written or submitted?
Not as of right now.
All right,
I would like to ask Dr. Steele, we're working on the Marshall Plan for Black America to try to get some stimulus funds specifically for African Americans and, and other minorities, but we think it's far-fetched because the administration will never sign it. And you're saying that we need to encourage people to advocate for this. What's the best way in your mind to do that?
Well, first of all, it starts with conversation. That's a good question, Braden. Thank you for the question. It starts with conversation. And too often, we don't understand the process. First of all, Dr. King has 6 principal steps in the Kingdom Nonviolent that I follow religiously. It'll save your marriage, save your church, it'll save this country. It will save you. First, gather information. We got the facts. Gather information. 75% of all the folks that go to work, or who were going to work here in the United States of America, 75% of them work from check to check. Poor folks, 75%. So we gather the information. That's number one. After you get the information, you educate the public. See, even with what we're doing here tonight, jot down what all of us are saying, and let's collectively get back together, and then let's grow this thing. But you educate the people after you get the information. Number 3, you make a personal commitment. How personal can you get if you're gonna sacrifice your life, your livelihood, your family?
I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna jump in. That the rumor is that those guys who killed that boy in down there in Georgia, they raised $8 million, or up to $8 million for their legal defense and media public relations fund. And I'm like thinking to myself, you're in the civil rights, you're out talking to people. How easy is it for you to raise $8 million to uplift minorities or African Americans, when at the same time these guys, murderers, can raise $8 million to defend themselves? I mean, seems like there's a lack of commitment on the part of.
That's the key. That's it, Mr. Cummings. That's it. Okay. The commitment. You hit it on the head. We think that we have arrived. And I'm talking about just black folks and fair-minded thinking white folks. And let me just get something straight. We could not have done this by ourselves in terms of whatever we have accomplished. We have to have other ethnicities of background. Fair-minded thinking people of all ethnicities and background got to be a part of this. We couldn't have made it this far without the right.
I think Bill, I think you need to mute your phone.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Okay. All right.
So what I'm saying, you hit it on the head, and I'm not going to prolong. I don't want to take up all of the show time. But the point being, you hit it on the head, Kevin. Personal commitment. I have to travel the world to get money to keep the doors open at SCLC.
Yeah. No. I've talked to other.
Getting it from this organization, that organization. We all after the same money when we should be collaborating and working together and distributing the money among ourselves.
Yeah. Bill, you ready?
Sure. Here, hold on. Let me unmute. And then I'm gonna actually shut this other phone down here. Give me a second.
And I'll just say, everybody on the call, we will have a little time for questions and answers. We'll stay a little late if we have to. We just want to have Mr. Cunningham have time to do this presentation, which you're truly going to enjoy, or it's going to fire you up a bit. So, Bill, were you able to just share the screen? Are you having any trouble with that, or do you still want to do that?
Yep, I'm good. Let me try that right now. Share. Can you see you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir, we can.
Very good. We'll go here. All right. So, again, let me say how honored I am to be on this call. I really appreciate the Congressman. Mr. Steele and I are old presentation buddies. This is our stick. We kind of do this stick together. So I appreciate it. It's good to be with you again. Real quick, Mr. Boulassis, Mr. Tabor, and Mr. Jin, my current and potential interns, please take notes and send a summary of this talk to me as soon as you can. Tomorrow morning is fine, but I just want to point that out. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you guys being on the call. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the economic impacts that we see coming down the road from the COVID-19 crisis and Black people in particular. You know, as Dr. Steele and as Brady indicated, you know, I'm not really going to pull any punches here. Yeah, I'm just the numbers guy. I'm just the numbers guy, so don't blame me for the numbers. They are what they are. But I do think that, you know, this will appear to be pretty strong and pretty negative and pretty hopeless. But let me, just running through the numbers, but let me say this. I do think there's an opportunity here to actually create a better situation for Black people than the one that we came into this crisis with. There is that potential. There's $30 billion for minority depository institutions that's been allocated out of the Rescue Act funds. So you could see a revitalization of Black banks. You could see a revitalization of Black fintech companies, that sort of thing. Hard to do, but that is a potential outcome that would be better than the situation that we came into. So, you know, one of the things Kevin asked me to do was to go over our survey. So we surveyed Black companies with respect to the rescue funds that had been allocated, the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Impact Disaster Loan Program, both out of SBA. And we asked 4 questions. We asked these firms if they had received, or if they had applied for, the Paycheck Protection Program funding. 64% of the firms, and there were basically about 100 firms that answered our survey. So 64% of that 100 did apply, 35% did not. And then looking at whether or not they actually received funding, 19% of the survey respondents, not the applicants, 19% of the survey respondents got funding, 81% did not. Now, what's important here is that those numbers are better than popular opinion would lead you to believe. The caveat is, and again, talking to my interns, be prepared to go over this survey and go over these numbers. The issue is that the 19% got far less than they asked for or expected. The 19% got far less than they asked for or expected. Now that was, again, as Dr. Steele pointed out, none of this stuff is an accident. This is a continuation of historical patterns with respect to biases in the allocation of economic resources that is particularly critical now. Let me also say this. One of the reasons why we are optimistic about the ability of this crisis to generate new hope is because we believe that this crisis will lead to a complete reevaluation of economic thought and economic theory. If you think, one of the reasons why we think that is because, I mean, let's take a look at the situation. So one of the key caveats, one of the key beliefs in economic theory is that globalization works, that you should offload, outsource your production to the country that has the best competitive advantage in producing whatever goods and services you're talking about. So if China can make a t-shirt for $2 less than you can make it in the US, then you should ship all of your production to China. This crisis shows why that does not work. That was always a fallacy. It was always a fallacy. That level of production shifting only served to increase the wealth of people who had capital, the companies that were invested in the production processes and their suppliers of capital. So Wall Street and certain firms benefited from this idiotic globalization approach, which we now know it makes absolutely no sense because you run into situations, emergency situations, where you need to produce. In our case, it was masks, but in my example, let's say it's t-shirts. Yeah, you come to a situation where you absolutely have to have this stuff, and you no longer have the productive capacity in your geography in order to produce this good. Why not? Because you listen to the economists, mainly white, who told you that globalization was good and that you should move production to the lowest cost center. That was always idiotic. This crisis shows that, and a number of other factors as being false with respect to economic theory. So we think you're going to see a complete revision, a complete revisiting of economics and economic theory, and we think that's a good thing. Now, let's move on to the last two questions that we asked in our survey. Did you apply for the SBA's Economic Disaster Loan Program? So of the firms that responded to our survey, 68% did apply for that funding. Let's see, and I've got to minimize the screen. 13% received EIDL funding, 86% did not. Now, taken together, we see that 19% of the respondents to the survey got some level of Paycheck Protection Program funding. 13% got some level of EIDL program funding. What this means is this is why Black unemployment, one of the reasons why Black unemployment shot up so greatly, and unemployment overall shot up so greatly. These programs were supposed to keep the unemployment rates below, let's say, 10%. I think people were hoping that unemployment would go no higher than 10%. We know that unemployment currently, as recorded, is much higher. The statistics that were released on Friday showed unemployment, at very high levels. The actual unemployment rate is probably overall, for the country overall, right now, the actual unemployment rate is probably something like 25% actual unemployment. For Black people, we think the actual unemployment is somewhere in the 40% category. And we will come to an analysis of those numbers in our next couple of slides. Now,
hey, Bill, do you mind if we take a question from Kia, or do you want to wait till the end of your presentation?
No, questions are good.
Okay, Kia, I've unmuted you, go ahead.
I think my question is a little late because I was going to ask it before this particular session started. But it was just really like, what are some actionable steps that people can, start immediately tomorrow? Is it something that people should be doing right away? Are there resources or websites that we can post in the chat for people who are listening to begin to find solutions for their situations?
Absolutely. So the first thing to do, and let me skip through to this next slide. Actually, this was the slide where we're going to talk about the wealth impacts. So if you take a look at that YouTube link at the top of this slide, go to that link and take a look at that video. That's a video from the Congressional Black Caucus talk that I gave on Black wealth. It will set the stage for the analysis. That's number one. Number two, when you go to that slide though, look on our videos for our video on the EIDL program, how to apply for the EIDL program. We did a video where we walked through the application process. And also, if you're running a business, you certainly should apply, regardless of what the numbers show, for the Paycheck Protection Program. That's still a viable option at this point. That program is close to, well, they restocked it and they are taking applications now. So EIDL and Paycheck Protection Program should be the first thing you do to try to get some money in the door. The other program, of course, is the $1,200 grant or payment that the U.S. government committed to providing. We've heard stories of, Black people actually getting those payments. So those are 3 cash flow sources that you can apply to right now, one of which has a 100% probability rate, that's the $1,200. The other 2 have probability rates in the order of, based on our numbers, 18% and 13%. So you can't depend upon those other 2, but you definitely should be applying to those. That's firstly. Fourthly, the other thing that you should be doing right now is caucusing and communicating with your network of people, friends, family, past clients, future clients, everybody, and ask them for money. Ask them for money. This is not the time to be shy about asking for money. So what I like to see, and actually what I think my family did, was they did actually form a little loan pool for family members who were in specific need, food, it wasn't very big, but it doesn't have to be very big. So look to your family, and trust me, I'm Black. I have a Black family. I know how complicated it is. All right, but this is a time to look at those internal resources that you have. So to recap and to shorten this up, the 3 federal programs, the $1,200 payment, the Paycheck Protection Program, the EIDL program, first and foremost, get those things done. Look on our website, the YouTube page that we have for a video on how to apply to those programs. The other sources for business people now that we like a website called Lendio, LENDIO.com. We think they're okay. We still have some issues with all of these guys, but Lendio, they reached out to us, we reached out to them. The people that we talked to were really committed and personally invested and involved in trying to get capital to Black companies, minority companies, women companies. They seemed like they were really committed, and we've had some ongoing dialogue and discussion. So I would encourage you to reach out to those guys. And then finally, PayPal, PAYPAL. They've been doing some really interesting things to try to get capital to people. So those are some immediate steps that you can take. Now, the best of the steps that I mentioned is actually the family one. You could use this crisis to create some, and you're going to need them. You're going to need them down the road. We'll get to that slide a little later, but you're going to need to have family collaboration for Black people if we're going to get through this crisis. And as I mentioned in 2016, when this guy was first elected, things are going to get much worse before they get better. So all of these sources are what's going to be needed. And we will, look at minorityfinance.com, creativeinvest.com. We will continue to post our opinion and the resources that we find on our websites. Is that helpful?
Bill, that's great.
Yes, that's helpful.
All right,
appreciate it.
I think that was my lawyer chiming in. How you doing, Counselor? Mr. Bailey there. Appreciate you joining. All right, so this slide that you're seeing is the slide, again, from the talk that we gave at the Congressional Black Caucus Black Wealth talk in 2019. Posted this up just so you could see how much wealth there is in the United States of America. There's $100 trillion of wealth in the United States of America, 98.3, but $100 trillion worth of wealth. Now, if you look at this crisis in terms of how this crisis is going to impact that figure, overall, well, actually, let me move to the next slide. This is the slide from that same talk where we went over Black wealth relative to white wealth. So you see white median wealth. these numbers are from 2016, but they're close to where we are in 2020. White wealth, 171,000, black wealth, $17,600. What this crisis is going to do, white median wealth will fall by about, we think, about 20,000. So you'll have white median wealth go down to about 151,000. Black people, on the other hand, you'll see median wealth fall by about 7,000. So we think that at the end of the day, at the low point, we think that you'll see black median wealth at about $10,000. And now we'll talk about why that is in the next slide, why we think that is in the next slide, which really addresses the question of, all right, well, where are we? What are the important factors and what should we do? So let's move on to that slide. This is it. This is the dashboard that we've put up in a lot of cases. I'm going to go through this pretty carefully, so give me a couple of minutes to roll through this. This is the most important slide of the presentation. The top round circular graph kind of shows what the critical issues are for Black people. Critical issues ranked in terms of their impact. Moving on, you've got 6 months left in 2020. We think this shutdown has 19 weeks to go. Now, that's not all at the shutdown at the same level, but we think it's going to be 19 weeks before you get back to even close to a normal non-shutdown situation, people going to work, people driving, the metro crowded again, that sort of thing. We think it's going to be about 19 weeks. Now, what we've, in the bars there, under the round circular thing and the timing indicators, we break out the sectors and their impact and kind of comment on their importance. So let's start at the top, employment. We think, we just said Black unemployment was probably at 40%. So we think Black unemployment will hit 50% at peak, at the absolute peak of this thing, 50%, maybe even a little higher, 55%. As I said in the comment, we think it might trend higher. Now, in terms of overall impact and importance, we rate that at 85%, 100% being, you know, the absolute most critical thing. So it's pretty important, but it's pretty critical from the standpoint of income generation, cash flow for Black families, employment, very, very critical. We were just gaining some traction in the employment arena. And here's a reason why we think Black unemployment might go higher than 50%. Black people are the last hired, first fired. When white people are in economic crisis, the first thing they do is throw Black people overboard. It's the first thing they do, you know? And this is as big a crisis as we've ever seen in the economic life of the United States of America. So what we think you're going to see, we think you're going to see just massive firing of Black people who just got to the job front to begin with. The other issue is that if you look at some of the recent gains that Blacks made in employment, a lot of them were in restaurants, service industries, that sort of thing. We were just getting a toehold there, and now the rug has been pulled out from under us. This is a critical area, a critical area. Moving on, homeownership. We expect Black homeownership to fall to 20% again, maybe a little less than 20%, after having risen to 45%. I think it was 48.6% in the years before 2008. So it will come off pretty dramatically. Now, our solution is you could have the Federal Reserve help out here to prevent that number from falling much further than 20%. What they would do is, which is something that a product and a process that we outlined in 1992. The way this works is that there are things called mortgage-backed securities issued by organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They were created to provide home mortgage credit. So what the Fed could do is the Fed could engage with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to create mortgage-backed securities backed by loans to Black homeowners. You know, banks, mortgage brokers, others go out, make high quality, legitimate home mortgage loans to Black people. Fannie and Freddie pool those loans together into a mortgage-backed security, and then the Federal Reserve buys those securities. Here's the deal. This is what has saved the white and the Jewish firms on Wall Street. The Federal Reserve has been the institution by purchasing those entities' securities and by providing them with cash. They have already bailed out white people. They have, and basically rich white people, but white people nonetheless, to the exclusion of bailing out either low-income whites or Black people. And Hispanic people don't even think about it. The same thing with Native Americans. So if they wanted to target their efforts to rescue Black homeowners, home buyers, they could. They could if they wanted to, but it's going to be tough. Now, in terms of importance, we rate homeownership at 50%. It's not critical. It's not. We've got other things to worry about. Now, moving on, thinking about other things to worry about, what's the most critical factor? Health. Health. Health is the most critical problem that we face. We know that this particular virus has a high incident in the Black community and elevated death rates. It is, again, the most critical factor. We rate it at 95% importance out of 100, 95 out of 100 in terms of critical importance. This is also the factor that is going to be the most negative. It's going to be the one that if we have a problem, if we get tripped up, it's going to be because of this health issue. And the reason is, once again, take a look at the video that we did for Black Wealth at Congressional Black Caucus, because I talked about that then. I talked about the lack of top-level hospitals and healthcare facilities in Black communities. I also talked about gentrification is what I was talking about in the clip. If you view it, and by the way, interns, make sure you view that video. It's about an hour long. I know it's a little long, but please go through it. You don't have to include it in your write-up, but I do expect you to have listened to the video. The issue is this. As we said, if you think about gentrification, some of these poor Black communities and their lack of hospitals right now, if you roll out the tape 5 years, when these entities, when these communities become majority white, you know that they're going to have a hospital in those communities. No hospital when it's majority Black, hospital when it's majority white. That is fundamentally unfair. But it also points to the nature of this economic system. That's not an accident. The lives of a significant percentage of the population are simply undervalued, and the allocation of economic resources matches that undervaluation. So this is what we're fighting against with respect to impact investing. This is what we think, actually. We think now with this crisis, we think you'll get a lot more attention and a reevaluation of these economic theories.
Hey, Bill, I've got sort of an esoteric question, but it ties in here, so I want to ask it while you're on the subject. Opportunity funds, opportunity zones. You know, given that there's going to be a discounting, especially of commercial real estate, how does that transfer of wealth apply here? Have you done any modeling on what that looks like if a bunch of opportunity funds are able to buy, distressed properties coming out of COVID?
Opportunity zones are economic empowerment areas that were created by this administration. And basically what you do is you give rich white people the opportunity to take capital gains that they've made on investments, and invest in poor Black communities. And once they make those investments, if they hold on to the investments for 10 years, they pay no taxes on it. So take your winnings, take your gains from the investments that you've made over the past 20 years, take those gains, invest in a poor Black community, and don't pay any taxes. So we were always worried about that program accelerating gentrification and being a force for negativity with respect to the Black community. It's on steroids now. We know the other thing to keep in mind about that program is that it's a sham. It is part and parcel of this administration's dishonest and damaging approach to the economic lives of Black people. You'll recall famously.
Bill, can I step in? We've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Would you mind if I took, if there's any questions for someone that's got to drop off at 7, and then we can continue on for a few minutes? Because I know you haven't wrapped up yet. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is that okay?
This is the last slide. So, let's go through this real quickly, then we can take questions. Small business, not critical, but we certainly think you're going to have high closure rates. The positivity here is that Black business owners have great survival skills. So the closure rates will be a little lower. That's also an opportunity, given the survival skills of Black people. You might, using those survival skills, have an opportunity to capture certain economic opportunities as white firms exit. And then education, lingering impact there. You have the best opportunity to fix a critical issue, we think, with respect to education. The economic impact of education over the long term is the absolute highest. So you do have an opportunity to enforce a major fix there through creativity. It is not critical, however, over the course of the next couple of weeks, couple of months. So questions?
Okay, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to unmute your line. I'm going to unmute all lines because
Brady, this is Charles Steele.
Yes, sir.
And I'm gonna have to get off in 2 or 3 minutes. But Bill, great presentation. Great presentation. As always, I enjoy your presentation, and it's very practical. What I want to ask before I have to go to another meeting at my office is that it is being predicted that, as you know, HBCUs, historical Black colleges and universities, are really on thin ice at this particular time, and has been for a while, even with the Pell Grants. It is being communicated from the academic community that I'm in correlation and correspondence with, that maybe 50% of our HBCUs, colleges and universities, will not survive in the next year and a half to 2 years. Do you have any type of feelers on that?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Remember, at its most negative, what this crisis will do is wipe out Black institutions across the board. Banks, schools, businesses, professions, at its most negative. Now, given that there is money, there ostensibly is money that you could direct to those institutions, the $30 billion that was allocated for minority depository institutions. Once again, what this crisis shows is the exact nature of the inability of Black people to access resources. So that $30 billion should move to HBCUs. That would be the way to take care of that problem. And remember, I talked about how this is the best opportunity for a fix.
At this particular time, Bill.
So yes. So what happened was, out of the second PPP tranche of funding, there was $30 billion that was allocated to minority depository institutions, small banks, small credit unions, etc. So what I'm suggesting is the Black banks should get together, grab about $1 billion of that, and allocate it to HBCUs. Part of the issue is, and I talked about this earlier, the issue, my internet connection is unstable here, so I'm going to give it a second. Okay, there we go. The issue is, Black people have been taught over the past 40 years not to be that collaborative. you know, and in a crisis situation where everybody is scrambling for every penny because they're so worried about their ability to survive, the damage that has been done to the Black community over the course of the past 40 years will show up again here. It's a bit of a pipe dream on my part to suggest that Black banks would have the wherewithal, the sense to pool their resources. They're facing the same issues that everybody is. They ain't got no money. The little money that Congress has allocated, the white boys are going to grab that and allocate it for their own purposes. And the Black guys aren't collaborative enough to work together to get their fair share. So we know that happened in the 2008 crisis, where one Black bank came in and grabbed most of the resources that were targeted to Black banks. He survived. 10 other Black banks did not. It's that me, that greed is good attitude that is the biggest risk to the Black community.
On that note, if Kevin, Bill, and Dr. Steele, thank you so much. Kevin, can you, we're way past, we need to honor everyone's time here. So I apologize for being rude and butting in, but we do have to close it down. Kevin,
yeah, so yeah, that's fine. You forget, sometimes this needs to be 2 hours. Whenever I have Dr. Steele and Bill, I need to allot for an hour for each one. But this was good, guys. Thank you all for showing up. I mean, if there's interest, we'll do more of this. We can do a follow-up. We are working very hard. Kia asked a question about actions and steps to take, and we started with the whole idea of reparations, and then we're talking about the Black Marshall Plan. We need to start asking for stuff. Like I said, we have to demand that we get stuff. I mean, we have to advocate. African Americans, we talk about this all the time. African Americans spend precious little time and even less money on advocating for things that would be beneficial. Which is why the first PPP was so, done so poorly, where, the SBA and banks are always discriminatory. And so we're very interested in that. And so with that, I'm going to leave it. And thank you all. Like I said, if there's interest, we'll do more of this, because we think over the next, like I said, Bill says 19 weeks, whatever, the next year and a half, 2 years, we're going to have to fight for everything we can possibly get in order to survive this. Thank you all, and good night.
Okay, I'm going to shut the meeting down now, but if anybody would like a copy of this recording, please let me know via email, and I'll send you a link. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Steele. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.